In the heart of Singapore, amidst the bustling, densely packed public housing estates of Toa Payoh, there existed a darkness that went unnoticed for years. It was the early 1980s, a time of rapid modernization and economic growth for the island nation. Yet beneath the veneer of progress, ancient superstitions and primal fears still held sway over the vulnerable. This is the story of Adrian Lim, a man who weaponized faith, twisting it into a grotesque instrument of manipulation, torture, and ultimately, ritualistic murder. Adrian Lim was not a monster born of the shadows. He was a monster created in plain sight. To the outside world, he was a self-styled medium, a healer who claimed to possess supernatural powers. He operated out of a modest flat in Block 12, Toa Payoh Lorong 7. For years, the residents of the block had complained to the authorities about the strange, unsettling noises emanating from Lim's apartment in the dead of night. They spoke of bizarre rituals, of chanting that seemed to vibrate through the concrete walls, and of an oppressive atmosphere that clung to the corridor outside his door. But the complaints were often dismissed as mere nuisance, the eccentricities of a harmless, if disruptive, neighbor. They did not know that behind that door, Lim was cultivating a cult of personality, preying on the desperate and the gullible. Lim's modus operandi was insidious. He targeted women, often those from impoverished backgrounds or those facing personal crises. He offered them salvation, healing, and spiritual guidance. But his true intentions were far more sinister. He used his supposed supernatural abilities to instill fear and dependency in his victims. He convinced them that they were cursed, that they owed him a karmic debt, and that only he could protect them from the wrath of vengeful spirits. Among his victims were two women who would become inextricably linked to his horrific crimes, Tan Mui Chu and Hoi Ka Hong. Lim manipulated them with a terrifying blend of psychological abuse and physical violence. He convinced them that they were his holy wives, a title that masked the reality of their enslavement. He subjected them to years of sexual torture, financial exploitation, and mind control, breaking down their will until they were nothing more than extensions of his own twisted desires. The turning point came in 1980. Lim's facade of spiritual authority began to crack when one of his victims, a woman he had drugged and raped, found the courage to file police charges against him. The impending investigation threatened to expose his entire operation, to tear down the empire of fear he had so carefully constructed. Faced with the prospect of prison and public ruin, Lim's mind, already warped by delusions of grandeur and sadism, descended into pure madness. He decided that the only way to derail the investigation, to appease the dark forces he claimed to serve, and to assert his ultimate power, was through the most horrific act imaginable: blood sacrifice. On the afternoon of January 24th, 1981, the innocence of Toa Payoh was shattered. 9-year-old Agnes and Siew Heok, a student at the Holy Innocents Chinese Girls' School, vanished. She had last been seen by her sister and a friend at a local church, where she was attending religious classes. The disappearance of a child in broad daylight sent shockwaves through the community. Frantic searches were organized, but as the hours ticked by, hope began to wane. The grim reality was discovered later that evening. Agnes's lifeless body was found stuffed inside a bag, abandoned outside a lift on the ground floor of Block 11, less than a kilometer from the church where she was last seen. The details of her death were sickening. She had been smothered, her small body left naked and violated. The autopsy revealed horrific injuries, a testament to the sheer brutality of her killer. The discovery of Agnes's body plunged Singapore into a state of terror. Parents kept their children indoors, the streets of Toa Payoh grew quiet, and a palpable sense of dread hung over the estate. The police launched a massive manhunt, but the killer had left few clues. The community was paralyzed by the knowledge that a predator was walking among them, a monster capable of unimaginable cruelty. But the nightmare was far from over. Adrian Lim's thirst for blood had not been quenched. The sacrifice of one innocent life was not enough to satisfy the dark gods of his own making. 2 weeks later, on February 6th, the horror struck again. 10-year-old Ghazali bin Marzuki, a student from Henry Park Primary School, went missing. Witnesses reported seeing the young boy boarding a taxi with an unknown woman. The pattern was terrifyingly familiar. The city held its breath, praying for a different outcome, but fearing the worst. The following day, February 7th, Ghazali's body was discovered. He was found lying under a tree between blocks 10 and 11, mere meters from where Agnes's body had been discarded. The scene was a chilling echo of the first murder. Ghazali, too, was naked. He had been drowned, but his body bore the marks of suffocation, similar to those found on Agnes. There were burns on his back and a puncture wound on his arm. Toxicology reports would later reveal traces of a powerful sedative in his bloodstream. The police were dealing with a serial killer, one who operated with a terrifying level of calculation and sadism. But this time, the killer had made a mistake. A crucial, fatal error that would lead the authorities straight to the heart of the darkness. As investigators combed the area around Ghazali's body, they noticed something that would break the case wide open: a trail of blood. It was scattered, faint in places, but unmistakable. It led away from the tree, across the concrete pathways and towards Block 12. The police followed the macabre path, their tension mounting with every step. The trail led them into the stairwell of Block 12, winding its way up, floor by floor. First floor, second floor, third floor. The blood droplets, like a gruesome breadcrumb trail, guided them higher into the concrete monolith. Finally, the trail ended on the 7th floor. It stopped directly in front of the first flat in the common corridor. Unit number 461. Inspector Pereira, leading the investigation, stepped up to the door. What he saw immediately set him on edge. The entrance to the flat was adorned with an eclectic, deeply unsettling mix of religious symbols: a Christian cross, a traditional Chinese mirror, and most chillingly, a sharp knife blade, all mounted on the doorframe. It was a chaotic amalgamation of faiths, twisted into a bizarre warding sigil. Before Pereira could even knock, the door opened. Standing there was Adrian Lim. He was calm, almost welcoming. He introduced himself to the inspector, casually mentioning that he lived in the flat with his wife, Tan Moi Chu, and his girlfriend, Ho Ka Hong. Lim, perhaps believing in his own invincibility, or perhaps driven by a twisted sense of arrogance, invited the police inside. He permitted them to search his home. It was a decision that would seal his fate. As the officers moved through the dimly lit flat, the oppressive atmosphere was suffocating. The air was thick with the smell of incense and something else, something metallic and foul. It didn't take long for them to find what they were looking for. Traces of blood were found inside the apartment. When confronted, Lim's calm demeanor faltered for a moment. He attempted to explain away the stains, claiming they were merely candle wax. When the officers pointed out the obvious biological nature of the stains, Lim changed his story, insisting it was chicken blood used in his rituals. But the police were not fooled. The evidence was overwhelming. Adrian Lim, Tan Mui Chu, and Ho Ka Hong were arrested on the spot. The self-proclaimed medium, the master manipulator, was finally in custody. But the true horror of what had transpired within the walls of Unit 467F was only just beginning to come to light. The subsequent investigation and trial would peel back the layers of Lim's depravity, revealing a level of sadism that shocked even the most hardened detectives. The public, already traumatized by the murders, was subjected to a daily barrage of gruesome details as the 41-day trial, the second longest in Singapore's history at the time, unfolded. The courtroom became a theater of the macabre. The prosecution painted a picture of a man who had systematically destroyed the lives of the women around him, turning them into willing accomplices in his monstrous crimes. Lim, Tan, and Ho did not deny their guilt. Instead, their defense teams argued diminished responsibility, claiming that the trio was mentally ill, suffering from schizophrenia and psychotic depression, and therefore could not be held fully accountable for their actions. Psychiatrists and psychologists took the stand, offering conflicting testimonies about the mental state of the accused. The defense experts argued that Lim was a victim of his own delusions, a man who genuinely believed he was communicating with deities and demons. They pointed to his bizarre behavior, his erratic mood swings, and his grandiose claims as evidence of a fractured mind. But the prosecution's experts painted a very different picture. They argued that Lim was a highly intelligent, manipulative psychopath who was fully aware of the wrongfulness of his actions. They pointed out that the murders were meticulously planned and executed, that Lim had taken steps to cover his tracks, and that his supposed delusions were nothing more than a calculated charade designed to evade justice. The judges ultimately agreed with the prosecution. They saw through Lim's facade, recognizing him not as a madman, but as a cold-blooded killer who had used religion and superstition as tools of control and destruction. The verdict was unanimous. Adrian Lim, Tan Mui Chu, and Ho Ka Hong were found guilty of murder and sentenced to death by hanging. While on death row, the two women, perhaps finally free from Lim's immediate control, appealed to the Privy Council in London and pleaded for clemency from the President of Singapore. Their pleas were denied. The gravity of their crimes, the sheer brutality inflicted upon two innocent children, left no room for mercy. Adrian Lim, true to his arrogant nature, did not seek any pardons. He accepted his fate with a chilling indifference, perhaps still believing in his own twisted mythology, or perhaps simply recognizing that his reign of terror had finally come to an end. On November 25, 1988, the final chapter of the Toa Payoh ritual murders was written. Adrian Lim, Tan Mui Chu, and Ho Ka Hong were led to the gallows at Changi Prison. As the trapdoors opened, the lives of three of Singapore's most notorious killers were extinguished, bringing a grim sense of closure to a nation that had been forever scarred by their actions. The legacy of the Toa Payoh murders extends far beyond the execution of the perpetrators. The case forced Singapore to confront the dark underbelly of its society, to acknowledge that even in a modern, prosperous city, ancient fears and superstitions could still be weaponized with devastating consequences. It highlighted the vulnerability of those who seek solace in the supernatural, and the terrifying power of those who claim to speak for the divine. Today, Block 12 in Toa Payoh still stands, a silent witness to the horrors that unfolded within its walls. The residents go about their daily lives, but the memory of Adrian Lim and his holy wives lingers, a dark stain on the history of the estate. The story serves as a chilling reminder that true evil does not always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, cloaked in the guise of salvation, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. To truly understand the horror of the Toapayoh ritual murders, one must delve deeper into the psychology of Adrian Lim and the environment that allowed him to thrive. Lim was not a sudden aberration. He was the culmination of years of unchecked manipulation and a society's reluctance to intervene in matters deemed spiritual or private. Lim's journey into darkness began long before the murders. He was a man obsessed with power and control, traits he masked behind a veneer of religious devotion. He studied various esoteric practices, blending elements of Hinduism, Buddhism, and local folklore to create a bespoke belief system that served only one purpose: his own self-aggrandizement. He claimed to be an avatar of the Hindu goddess Kali, a deity often associated with destruction and rebirth. But in Lim's twisted interpretation, she became a patron of his sadism. His apartment in Block 12 was a physical manifestation of his fractured mind. It was a chaotic shrine filled with statues, talismans, and bizarre artifacts. The air was constantly thick with the smoke of incense and the metallic tang of blood. Animal blood, he claimed, used in his rituals. This oppressive atmosphere was designed to disorient and intimidate his victims, making them more susceptible to his influence. The women he targeted were often desperate, seeking solutions to problems that conventional means had failed to solve. They came to him for healing, for luck, for protection. Instead, they found a predator. Lim used a combination of psychological manipulation, sleep deprivation, and physical abuse to break down their defenses. He convinced them that their suffering was a result of bad karma or demonic possession, and that only he could cleanse them. Tan Moi Chu and Hoe Ka Hong were tragic examples of his success. They were not merely accomplices. They were victims who had been entirely consumed by Lim's madness. He isolated them from their families and friends, controlling every aspect of their lives. He forced them to participate in his bizarre rituals, to endure horrific sexual abuse, and ultimately, to assist him in the murder of innocent children. The decision to murder Agnes and Ghazali was not a sudden impulse. It was a calculated escalation, a desperate attempt to maintain control as his empire of lies began to crumble. When the woman he had raped filed charges against him, Lim realized that his usual methods of intimidation would not work against the authorities. He needed a grander gesture, a sacrifice that would prove his ultimate power and appease the dark forces he believed he commanded. The choice of children as victims was particularly chilling. In Lim's twisted logic, their innocence made them the perfect sacrifices. Their purity would somehow cleanse him of his sins and protect him from the law. The brutality of their deaths, the suffocation, the drowning, the sexual assault, was a reflection of Lim's deep-seated sadism, a desire to inflict maximum pain and suffering. The investigation into the murders was a harrowing experience for the police. The sheer depravity of the crimes, the bizarre religious elements, and the cold, calculating nature of the perpetrators made it a case unlike any other in Singapore's history. The discovery of the blood trail leading to Lim's apartment was a stroke of luck, but it was the meticulous forensic work and the relentless interrogation of the suspects that ultimately secured their convictions. During the trial, the defense's argument of diminished responsibility sparked a fierce debate about the nature of evil and the limits of psychiatric defense. Could a man who meticulously planned and executed such horrific crimes truly be considered insane? Or was his madness simply a convenient excuse for his monstrous actions? The prosecution successfully argued that Lim's actions were driven by a clear, albeit twisted, logic. He knew what he was doing, and he knew it was wrong. His elaborate rituals and grandiose claims were not the symptoms of a fractured mind, but the tools of a master manipulator. The judges agreed, setting a precedent that would have a lasting impact on Singapore's legal system. The execution of Adrian Lim, Tan Mui Chu, and Hoi Ka Hong brought a sense of closure, but it could not erase the trauma they had inflicted. The families of Agnes and Ghazali were left to grapple with an unimaginable loss, their lives forever altered by the actions of a madman. The community of Toa Payoh was forced to confront the reality that such evil could exist in their midst, hidden behind the closed doors of a seemingly ordinary apartment. The Toa Payoh ritual murders remain a dark chapter in Singapore's history, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the vulnerability of the human mind. It is a story that continues to fascinate and horrify, a reminder that the monsters we fear are not always lurking in the shadows. Sometimes, they are the people we trust to guide us into the light. As we reflect on this tragedy, we must ask ourselves, how many other Adrian Lims are out there, operating in the margins of society, preying on the desperate and the vulnerable? And what can we do to ensure that such horrors are never repeated? The answers may be elusive, but the memory of Agnes and Ghazali demands that we never stop asking the questions. The psychological grip Adrian Lim held over his followers was not built overnight. It was a slow, methodical process of isolation and indoctrination. He preyed on the cultural superstitions that still lingered in the rapidly modernizing society of Singapore. In a world moving towards logic and reason, Lim offered a dark, comforting alternative. A world where unseen forces controlled destiny, and he alone held the key to appeasing them. He would often perform elaborate rituals, burning effigies and chanting incantations to convince his followers of his power. These performances were designed to overwhelm the senses, using smoke, noise, and the sheer force of his personality to create an atmosphere of awe and terror. He claimed to be able to cure illnesses, bring good fortune, and curse enemies. For those who believed him, he was a god. For those who crossed him, he was a demon. The tragedy of the Toa Payoh murders is compounded by the fact that there were warning signs. Neighbors had complained about the noise, the strange smells, and the unsettling atmosphere surrounding Lim's flat. But in a society that valued privacy and non-interference, these complaints were often brushed aside. The authorities, perhaps reluctant to intervene in what appeared to be religious practices, failed to recognize the danger until it was too late. This failure of the community to protect its most vulnerable members is a haunting aspect of the case. It raises uncomfortable questions about our collective responsibility to look out for one another, to speak up when we see something wrong, and to challenge those who use religion or spirituality as a cloak for abuse. The legacy of Adrian Lim is a dark stain on the history of Singapore, a reminder that even in the most developed and orderly societies, the primal forces of fear and superstition can still hold sway. His crimes were a stark illustration of the depths of human depravity, a chilling testament to what can happen when a fractured mind is given unchecked power over others. As we look back on the Toa Payoh ritual murders, we must remember the victims: Agnes Siew Heok and Ghazali bin Marzuki. Two innocent children whose lives were brutally cut short by a man who believed he was above the law, above morality, above humanity itself. Their memory serves as a constant reminder of the need for vigilance, for compassion, and for a society that protects its most vulnerable from the monsters that walk among us. The story of Adrian Lim is not just a true crime tale. It is a cautionary fable about the dangers of blind faith, the destructive power of manipulation, and the terrifying reality that evil can wear the face of a savior. It is a story that will continue to haunt the collective consciousness of Singapore for generations to come, a chilling echo of a darkness that was once allowed to thrive in plain sight. In the end, the Toa Payoh ritual murders stand as a grim monument to the fragility of human life and the enduring power of the human spirit to seek justice, even in the face of unimaginable horror. The execution of Lim and his accomplices may have brought a legal conclusion to the case, but the emotion